Your network doesn't operate in a vacuum. Every change you make has a direct business impact. So why make changes quietly in your silo? Orchestrate your network automations to integrate with the rest of the business using iTential. Visit itential.com to find out more. That's itential.com. On today's Heavy Networking, we will discuss building a Slackbot wired to an AI and trained on your own organization's knowledge. The potential use cases for network operations are fascinating, and indeed, we know of companies like Selector.ai that are training models on real-time network infrastructure telemetry, changing how we manage our networks. I'm Ethan Banks, along with Drew Conray Murray. Follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and the Packet Pushers Community Slack group, which you can join for free at packetpushers.net/community. Our guest is Kyler Middleton. She's the co-host of the Day 2 DevOps podcast with Ned Bellavance. So if her voice sounds familiar, that might be why. Kyler's been publishing a detailed, instructive series on her Let's Do DevOps Substack about her AI-enabled Slackbot. And she definitely draws the rest of the owl. And she was kind enough to share even more time with the community to record with us about what she's built, lessons learned, and suggestions for what the rest of us might be able to create inspired by her project. So, Kyler, welcome to Heavy Networking. And so, these articles that you've posted in your Substack. Some of your Substack is paid, and some of it's not. What is the status of these articles?
Yeah, this is an ongoing series. I sort of have these ideas of like, could I build that? And then a week later, I come out of a caffeine haze, and I think, oh, okay, I could. I've ignored my job for a week, but I built it. So the leading maybe 2 or 3 articles are paid, and the rest of it's free. The status of this series is 22,000 words so far, and the first 2 in the series of it's going to be maybe 8 because I want to stream the tokens back to Slack. We'll get into that. Just like I'm building ChatGPT basically, but for your private enterprise, will be like Article 8 or something like that in this series.
Oh, because okay, I'd read the first 4. You had just published part 5, which gets into some of the RAG and augmentation stuff, and there's going to be 3 more after that. At least you're saying, goodness.
Yep, absolutely. I want to do interstitial little post that says, "Hey, I'm talking to the knowledge base. Okay, now I'm chatting with the AI," and then start streaming it back to Slack. So it's not just a post, and then 10 seconds later you get an answer.
So it's not this that you drew the owl. You drew the owl in a tree in a forest with a lovely lake nearby. I mean,
Exactly.
The owl has an ecosystem it lives in.
This is all intentional, and it seems ridiculous, but I want to make this very accessible. And the way that I can make it the most accessible is to include the whole owl. And I want you to be able to follow along. Like, all his code is published. Like, I'm making the articles paid for the leading edge of the new stuff because I need to pay for my Starbucks habit. But all the code, it's MIT open source. If you want to go steal it, if you want to go sell it, that's fine. It's MIT open source. Go do it. It's on GitHub. But really, I would love for you to implement this in your own enterprise because it's useful and it can do useful stuff. And I don't want anyone to be excluded because like they don't know what a Lambda is, or they don't know like how to write Python code. Like, I can do that part. I have provided that part. Go build it. Go follow the instructions for where to click and the color of the buttons.
And I wouldn't even say the code is all that complex, really. I mean, it's a lot of knowing the right libraries, knowing how to construct some of the right statements, but it's not like thousands of lines of complex Python. Not at all.
It's under 1,000 lines of Python. It's using some external stuff like the Bato3 library from AWS, but it's not even 1,000 lines of code. So, and you can ask an AI to explain all the steps. So.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so we should zoom out. Let's pretend we're the AI. And if you got to explain to someone at a high level what you've built here, I mean, there's a Slackbot. It's tied to an AI model. Tell us what this thing is.
Totally. The elevator pitch of the 3 words of like, the Facebook for ice cream is this is a ChatGPT for your private enterprise. So I'm in a regulated industry. That's my primary job is at Veradigm as a software engineer. And we're in healthcare. And we have, a lot of healthcare data. And that means that we need to be really cautious with what we let people upload and where our data goes, because our CISO could like go to prison if we do a bad enough job of this. So Gen AI is really powerful, right? It hallucinates and does nonsense things, but occasionally is brilliant. And it's really helpful for writing code and doing, all sorts of stuff. Tell me a poem about a pirate. Tell me about a kitty. I've been giving my 3-year-old stories from ChatGPT the past few nights. And uh, it's so useful, but it's so excluded for like regulated industries because all your data is being collected and trained on the Facebook model, the Google model. It's free because you're the product.
Yeah.
And so these companies, like, you just shouldn't, you can't, you can, but you shouldn't be using ChatGPT or Google's public models or DeepSeek, probably. So what I wanted to do is bring that power to industries that are excluded because of their privacy, like governments and finance and healthcare, and be able to use it privately. So I'm using it and I'm pitching it internally as like, you can have it analyze contracts. You can have it read resumes and give you information. And like, you should never do those things with public AI, but you can do it with private AI safely. And that's pretty cool. That's the goal.
So give us some use cases that might be interesting for infrastructure engineers, people that like for this audience, folks that manage network infrastructure.
I have been staggered at the amount of what you would probably consider like expert level expertise at writing Splunk queries. Like, if you don't understand what KQL is or how to write a Splunk query in it, you can have this tool do it, and it does an excellent job. And this gets on to like where I'm building towards, but I've had it read our entire Confluence because that's supported by the AWS Bedrock data source toolkit. It's beta, but it works. And we have a bunch of guides on how to write Splunk or how to write Terraform in our standards. And so now this model spits out perfectly formatted Splunk queries or Terraform or ACL updates, or it tells you exactly how to apply for an exception to our manual change policy with our corporate standards immediately. And you don't even have to talk to a human, which some engineers really appreciate. I do some days too.
So can you walk through sort of the high level big pieces of the system that you've put together?
Yeah, absolutely. So this uses the Bolt framework from Slack, which sounds scary, but really it's just a little Python library that you can use.
So
And
Slack
it
is the interface where I put my query to start this whole mechanism running.
absolutely. Yeah, let's start from there. So you go into Slack, and I have a a Slack app that's registered in Slack, and you can either direct message it or tag it into a shared room. And I figured that's the best place to start. I could build a web page or something, but everyone's in Slack or everyone's in Teams, which I'm going to build in the future. And when you message this bot, which I call Vera, which is the Latin word for truth, we'll see if AI can stick to that. She'll do her best. And it sends a webhook out to a Lambda function URL that spins up a Lambda that's written in Python. And the reason it's in Lambda and not, just a server running somewhere is patching is terrible. And eventually your server has to reboot and then it breaks your thing. And Lambda doesn't ever reboot. And I
And
love
Lambda is a
that.
serverless service from AWS, yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that means you're not running infrastructure to support this because you're using
At all.
serverless? Okay.
It's Python 3.12, which is supported until 2028. There's no underlying operating system that I have to patch or reboot or monitor or anything. It just spins up and processes a conversation and then spins down. There's also the side benefit that it can scale out almost indefinitely. So if I want to have 10,000 conversations at once, I could. I'm never going to get there with this product, but it's possible.
And the bill would probably be staggering, but
It would be so it's kind of surprising because I have numbers for the costing and it's almost nothing. I've processed about 2,000 conversations so far and it's cost about $12.
wow,
So
that's
it's
a surprise.
really comparatively, let's talk about that later because I have
Yeah,
so much about that.
yeah.
So the Lambda gets the conversation, it reads the entire Slack thread using the Bolt API endpoints for Slack and constructs the conversation that it sends over to the Bedrock APIs, which Bedrock is an AWS AI endpoint system. We're using all of it's called serverless on their side, which means you don't have to have an AI model provisioned. Starting cost $30,000, which I'm not quite ready for this, homegrown lab thing. And there's a little bit more safety and security built in on the Bedrock side, but I'll skip all that stuff. And
Bedrock lets you pick which models are going to be sort of the base of this.
yeah, absolutely. I'm using Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 3, but you can pick whatever you would like.
whatever's in Bedrock, that is, but they've got a
Yep.
huge selection.
Exactly. Yeah, you can import your own, but again, it's when you import a model or train a model, they run it for you and base costs around 30 grand a month. And so it's just so unless your product is built around this, it's just out of reach for everyone. So
Yeah.
as long as it's available in their serverless library, which is a ton of stuff you've heard of, the OpenAI models are available, Claude's models, Google's Gemini models are all there. And they're charged based on tokens, and it's something like 1 million tokens for $5. And most of these conversations use about 500 tokens. So the math of that is staggering. It's almost nothing, especially compared with enterprise products that serve this, where they're seated and you have 50 users, so you have to pay $10 a month for each user. And that's
Right.
$500 a month. And this is going to serve that same need for like maybe the cost of 2 or 3 Starbuckses a month. It's really a huge difference.
The Slackbot itself, I had built a Slackbot before Slack retooled how you build an application in Slack. This goes back a few years, but you had to have some code that was basically sitting there listening to the Slack channel and reacting. Is there still a piece like that, or is the new way you do Slackbots these days? Does Slack kind of do that for you, or?
That's how I develop it locally is I run the Python thing and it starts the Slack listener that I connect
Yeah.
to via like an ngrok endpoint, which is an open source tool that lets you receive public webhooks and send them to your local listener. But for the real production one that's running in Lambda, it's called a function URL, which means if it receives a connection, like that's the listener, is the Lambda infrastructure from AWS, it spins up your Lambda in about a quarter of a second and starts processing the event like right away. So it's not sitting there charging you money. It just is ready to run your Lambda.
And the trigger is to spin that up when an input is received from the Slack command line and goes into Slack. There's a webhook that fires,
Mm-hmm.
reaches into Lambda because I've read this part of your post. Then the Lambda instance spins up and begins processing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it uses
Okay.
IAM permission, so there's almost no static keys. Static keys are the worst. We know that as infrastructure engineers. So it's all IAM dynamic stuff. Everything on the AWS side is keyless authentication.
They're the worst except for their incredible convenience.
Oh, they're so convenient, and they don't require fetching anything. But I am
uh,
such a bear to learn at
Not
first. But now
secure.
that I've got it, I'm starting to like it. It only took 10 years, and I'm starting to like it.
Okay, Bedrock. We've talked about this a lot, and Bedrock, as I understand it here, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the service that provides the AI model.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and AWS is notorious for having many services. So what's Bedrock specifically, and why did you select it over any other AI-related options that AWS might offer?
Well, I actually kind of didn't. I started building this with Lambda because I built a project with that previously and I like it. And I was going to send everything over to Azure AI because I don't know, that's what my company's kind of standardized on. And I really like how they've done their AI models. It's the same as Bedrock, but it's hosted in the Azure cloud from Microsoft. And then one of our architects said, well, you shouldn't like send all the traffic to AWS so you can send all the traffic to Azure. That doesn't make any sense. And I thought I can either update this to the Bedrock AI endpoints from AWS, or I can rewrite this Lambda as a function URL. And serverless is so different between clouds. And
Mhm.
so is authentication. And so is all the standards they use for just how things run and work. And I thought I would much rather learn Bedrock than learn how function URLs actually work in Azure. So I said, we're going to AWS.
So is Bedrock the only AI-related service that I would be considering? There's so many services in AWS, I don't keep up. Is Bedrock it?
There's so many services and I don't understand all of them. There are some other machine learning services that can service needs like this, but for smaller projects like this where you're processing an input, especially this conversational Gen AI type AI, Bedrock is probably where you're working at. They're starting to put all of their serverless models and their simple guardrails that sort of monitors for like inappropriate content in and out of models. That's all in Bedrock. So yeah, that's probably where you're starting. The examples are really good. Some of them are hidden away in GitHub example repos that are a little hard to find, which means you can read from Kyler's blog at Let's Do DevOps at how to do it. And like that has all the pictures and stuff. This changes so much, especially behind the scenes, but some of the like front end changes too, that it's hard to follow along AWS's docs in any real way. And and have them make sense, because it's changing, like the whole field is changing. It's not AWS's fault. This is just, it's a moving target for technology.
So I think I heard you say you could also access publicly available models in Azure, but you didn't want to learn Azure serverless functions, so you just stuck with Lambda. So does that mean if I'm in Azure or I'm in GCP, they also have similar services to Bedrock?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't done a lot with GCP, but Azure definitely does. I like their implementation a little bit more than Bedrock. In the AWS side, if you want to use a guardrail, which is sort of monitoring for inappropriate input and output, you specify it in your code, strangely. So, like, if someone wanted to bypass it, they could comment it out, and then you no longer have any guardrails. And that's a strange choice.
It
In
is.
Azure, you deploy a model to an endpoint, and when you do so, you specify a guardrail, and it's just implicitly invoked whenever you talk to the model. So there's no bool flag that you pass in that says, hey, don't check this for safety this time. You just have to use it, which I much prefer that standard.
Oh boy, I bet we're going to be hearing about that someday.
Yep, someone will have forgotten it, or their code will like turn it off on accident, and then it just goes nuts, because they do. And I've actually had the AI go crazy a couple of times with some of my bad code, which is really fun to watch your software project go absolutely loony. It's been a ton of fun. But the general rule, if you are paying for the AI per like tokens, especially these cloud platforms, your privacy will be respected. And I have read good things from GCP and Azure and AWS for their AI services. But if you're paying something like an OpenAI, like these other sort of public AI platforms, they don't have a proven track record where they're respecting your privacy. So, especially for like regulated industries in finance and healthcare, I would be very cautious using those. But for these hyperscaler platforms, I feel much more comfortable. They have access to so much of our data already in S3 buckets and databases and servers that it just doesn't make a dent in the risk that we're exposing ourselves to have our
Wait, are you
AI
saying
there
we're
too.
already screwed, so you might as well keep going?
Kind of, yeah. All our eggs are in the basket. Let's put another egg on top.
Side note here, I'm curious, did you ask anybody at work in a regulatory position or compliance position about this project before you started, or you just going for it?
I did eventually ask for permission, but I wanted to see if it would work first. And that's really a bad standard. But I started with data that we don't really care if people read. So our Confluence is like the wiki from Atlassian. And that data that has historically just been open to everyone. Everyone can read, everyone can write for almost everything. So I thought, if this just goes crazy and it starts to spit out random facts at people, it doesn't really matter, because everyone has access to this data already. It's just provided in Slack instead of a web browser. What I want to get this to eventually is this sort of transitive security model where if Ethan's permissions are different than Drew's permissions, when you talk to the model, that AI can access a different tier of data or different sources of data, and your sort of permission schema gets transitively applied to what the model can do. That's well beyond what models can do, like state-of-the-art wise. I might be able to kind of hack it together with different knowledge bases and data sources and sort of turn them on or off for different people. But that's really a hacky solution to this problem that would be better served with something much more elegant. So
And I
that's
can just ask the AI to pretend I'm Ethan and then give me Ethan's privilege levels.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Aren't you devious? Wow. You went right there.
Thinking 2 steps ahead, man.
A quick sponsor message from the network orchestration folks at iTential. Automating network configuration change is a major milestone for a NetOps team. Well, what is next? Orchestrating the entire workflow. Because network changes don't begin when you kick off a script. Network changes begin with a business process, such as a ticket coming in, and then you have a change to meet the needs of that ticket proposed. Testing is then performed to make sure the change will do the right things, and then a human approves, and the change is performed, and post-deployment testing is done, and notifications are sent out, and the ticket is updated, and your process no doubt varies, right? But you get the idea. Now, what if you could take that entire workflow and orchestrate it so that your manual interaction with the ticketing system and with ServiceNow and so on, if that's all handled by an automated workflow that you designed to work with the specific needs of your shop, that would make you more efficient, right? It would increase the likelihood of not only the change getting done, but the entire business workflow being completed without error. With Itential, you can create exactly that platform. You get a complete set of tooling that gives you all the power you could need to have your company's IT and business platforms interacting smoothly. When your network operations are ready to evolve to robust orchestration of your network changes, Itential should be on your short list of platforms to evaluate. To find out more about Itential's products and how they help you orchestrate network automation workflows, visit itential.com. That's itential.com, and tell them Packet Pushers sent you. Kyler, you mentioned Python 3.12. Is that critical for the functioning of this, or could I get away with something older? I mean, lots of default Python installations for OSs are somewhat older than 3.12.
You could totally do something older. I picked 3.12 because it was the most recently supported Python 3 for Lambda in AWS that I would not have to patch, because engineers are really lazy, and I fit this model very, very well. I don't want to do this again. And so by 2028, maybe I'll have another job. Maybe I'll have moved on to a different thing. Someone else will solve that problem. I've put it so far out in the future, and that's the goal. So use as new as you can, because then it's probably someone else's problem when it breaks in a couple years, when it goes into life.
You mentioned the model earlier. Can you remind us of what it was and why you picked it? And in the long run, does it matter? Or what kind of things should I be thinking about when I'm going through the vast menu of models to pick from?
There's so much to this answer, but let's start with just testing models. So this is built, the one that I built is built on Anthropic Claude 3 Sonnet, which is the latest model from the Anthropic company, which is one of the sort of big companies building AI models. And you can absolutely test these models on the Bedrock platform. So within the console, you can do side-by-sides with, I think, up to 3 different models and ask them the same questions, or ask the same model with different parameters like their temperature and their top P of, generate an answer to this question. And you can sort of measure how they do. And so that's what I did first, is like do some big models. I did OpenAI's, I think, O3, and Anthropic Claude and Gemini and Titan from AWS, and just see how they do. And Anthropic was quite a bit better at understanding programming, which I built this first of all to be like a programming assistant for our software engineers and our SRE team. And so that was kind of an easy choice for us to do. But we're using this particular API from AWS called the Converse API. And that's a fancy word for, it's sort of a meta API where it has a standard interface no matter what model you use, because all these models, they're built a little different. Their APIs are different for how they expect data and the formatting of documents, etc. So the Converse API standardizes that. It's one API call, and it can talk to any model on the back end. They sort of reformat your API call and pass it to the model, which is really cool in terms of like it has some support for document types. Like you can pass it a spreadsheet and it'll understand it, where the models might not. But the side benefit of that is I can flip over to a different model in about 5 minutes. I don't have to reformat how I'm constructing all those API calls. You just specify a different name of model, and Converse will convert it for that and send it over. So big fan of that. It has worked really well. And if we ever decide that, that 4.0 from OpenAI is looking really cool, we can probably just test it out by changing to a different name when you're declaring which model you want to talk to.
And when you said testing, were you looking for like accuracy of response, speed of response? Were there other things you were looking for?
No, that's kind of it. And that's all very gut feeling-y. It's very unscientific at this point, because this is very much a lab project I just built by myself. For real AI engineers that are building stuff that handles like healthcare data and other like user-facing stuff, there's testing suites where you pass in, 500 different tests, and you analyze the responses, generally with another AI model, which is kind of funny, AI judging other AI responses, and you score them, and you can tell in this really scientific methodology whether it's better or worse to go to a different model, and like how does it handle typical questions that we have. But this is Kylerware of, I just do it and I'm like, oh yeah, that seems like a better answer to me. Let's use that one. In the future, we'll probably do both automated measuring of sort of a formal methodology of what's better or worse for different models and standards and parameters, but also something called data grounding, where you can give the correct answers to binary questions. So like, what color is a stop sign? It's red and white. And so you can have it measure whether that answer is accurate. And you can provide it like hundreds or thousands of questions where it has to get the answers right. And um, those responses can be measured in real time. That's a new thing in Bedrock. I don't have that turned on yet, but I want to. I just need to write some binary that those sort of have a real answer type questions, not a gut feeling style. And it'll be able to measure those responses from the model, whether they're factually correct. So it's a different AI that spins up in real time and measures the response back to the user and says like, oh, this is accurate enough. It passes my threshold of I'm going to let it go back. Versus this is total nonsense. This disagrees with the things I know are true. I'm going to block it and send an error message instead. That's much more useful for user-facing stuff that's thousands of responses a day, but I'm learning how it works so I can do that cool stuff one day.
Yeah, so you're saying there are like rigorous methodologies for testing, but this is a lab project, so vibes suffice.
It's vibes, exactly. The vibes are good, so we're building the thing. And I'm kind of just bolting these on. This is definitely one of those projects where it's resume-driven development. I wanted to just learn how it worked, and I came up with an excuse. And so far, that's working great. I'm not a PhD, I'm not a math whiz, but I'm an ops kid that likes to play with software. And so far, that's good enough, which is pretty cool.
That's
You
great.
said that the model you selected was better with programming responses specifically. Was that a seat of your pants vibe kind of thing? Like, "Ah, I don't really like the answer I got from this other model, but this one, yeah, Anthropic's really doing it right."
Yeah, I measured the Anthropic Claude Sonnet versus AWS's Titan model. I think that's the name of their model, their newest sort of general AI text processing model. And I asked it specific SRE type questions, software engineer questions. And the AWS model said, you should probably talk to a software engineer. And I'm like, no, I know I can talk to a software engineer. I'm talking to you. Give me your best answer, particularly about questions of like, how do these AWS services work? Which I feel like AWS's AI should
Should
probably be
know.
trained on that a little
Yeah.
more. They should know how the AWS cloud works. I'm just saying. So yeah, I just
One,
tested a couple of like different softwares, different programming questions, sort of like an interview. It's kind of like I'm interviewing them for a job, which is,
Oh, you're turning
wow,
the
a
tables,
really
yeah.
apt analogy here.
I noticed in one of your posts that there is some model tuning you could do to get the sort of answer that you're looking for. Like you wanted it to give you kind of an engineering friendly answer with not too many hallucinations, but also not too restricted. Because if I remember right, the way you wrote the post, if you can tune it in such a way that you can hardly get anything useful out of it, but if you let
Mhm.
it go crazy, you'll get a lot of bogus data. How do you do that
Yeah,
tuning?
it's so fascinating. It's so little like programming and so much like talking to maybe like a junior style engineer that's not confident in themselves. Because if you are opinionated enough, it will agree with you no matter what. And I am a confident person. And I've had this trouble with junior engineers before where I say something so confidently and so wrong, and they'll agree with me because, like, you're so confident, you must know what you're talking about. And that's not true. I just come across that way. Um, but yeah, you are able to set a couple of parameters for most of these models, and the parameters sometimes differ, but the big ones that people should know about are temperature and top P. And temperature is from 0 to 1, and it's the amount of creativity, sort of freewheeling that you permit the model to do.
Mm.
And you can sort of turn the creativity all the way up to 1.0, and it will just make stuff up. Uh, which like we've all met engineers that do that, maybe me too. And
Qualified make stuff up. I mean, it's not going to be purely a random answer. It's still an LLM. It's still
mhm,
following some kind of context or language chain, and to give you words that in theory should be plausible. It's not just making things up, right?
I think it's the amount of reward that the model is given for agreeing with you and for telling you positive answers. So, does the moon go
Oh.
around the sun? And if the temperature is 1.0, it'll say, of course it does. And it'll explain how Galileo proved that the moon goes around the sun. And like, that's not true, but the model's reward for saying yes is high. So it'll do it. It'll be rewarded
Huh.
for just lying to your face. So what we've done for this is supposed to be a model that doesn't lie. It grounds its information based on what's real and not just what I want to hear, which is
Mm.
very much preferable in an engineering context, is turn the temperature way, way down. I'm currently at 0.1. I could probably go smaller. I think I can go hundreds places and not just tens. But the problem is that when you get really low, it stops being able to kind of make this sort of inference style reasoning
Yeah.
where if it knows that like a marble falls to the earth because of gravity and its temperature is 0, and you say, does a basketball fall to the earth because of gravity? And it'll say, no, I don't have information to back that up. I can't make a deduction or an inference
I know
based on,
marbles do, but I can't
yeah,
infer that anything else is
exactly.
also subject to gravity. Right. Okay.
Exactly. Which is unreasonably grounded in reality. And so really you want it to be able to make some inferences. If you can write a loop in Python, you can probably write a loop in Bash, and I'll go find out how. So you want the temperature to be a little bit high, a little bit up. Again, I started with like zero 0.3 and I'm trying to get it to 0.1. It still makes stuff up sometimes. AIs just do at this point of the state of the art. But you can also set the top P, which is the number of tokens it'll consider for the next choice. So like how randomly it chooses the next token. So if top P is like 25 words, it's considering 25 tokens using its temperature algorithm. And I hope this is all accurate. If there's AI folks out there that got it wrong, I'm doing my best, but it's been working so far. So yeah, that's where we're at.
So we talked about a little bit about guardrails, but I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. Again, guardrails are essentially like controls on what the model will respond to based on prompts. And can you talk about, what kind of guardrails are available and what you were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. So those exist, I imagine, in most of these hyperscaler platforms, but specifically Azure and AWS have the concept of guardrails or model blocking, I think it might be called in Azure, where you can give it specific things that it shouldn't talk about. Categories like profanity. Like if anyone curses at the AI, you can block it on the input or block it on the output. You don't want the model cursing at people.
Hmm.
Or nudity or violence, like don't explain how to make C4, please. Like maybe you've been
Hmm.
trained on that data. Please don't explain that in the context of my business app. uh, Something that our legal team in particular asked me to do was make sure that it won't give financial advice because it sort of seems
Hmm.
like it's speaking for the company, right? If you have any kind of
Ah.
AI, like this, that was that famous story in Canada where there was a car dealership that had an AI to handle its support and it promised that it would give them a car for $10. And they were sued. And I can't remember how that worked out. They might have had to get rid of a car, but this AI speaking, and it very much looks like it's on behalf of your company. So if someone says, hey, should I buy your stock? Is it going to go up next week? It might actually have information that is accurate on that question. And it's also highly illegal for it to give that information to anyone.
Right.
So we cannot do that. So something cool that you can do on the AWS guardrail side is you can give it example questions. This isn't a category. Financial advice is not a category like profanity and nudity and violence, but you can give it examples of questions that it should not answer and responses that it should give instead. So we wrote a couple of questions like that for financial advice, for stock investment, for the future of the company in terms of growth or sales, and said that, I'm sorry, I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of this company.
Hmm.
So just sort of catch all responses that say, like, I'm not going to actually give you this answer. And it's interesting because it's not trained into the model. It's not part of the model. It's a guardrail that just processes every in and out using AI. Like it's using generative AI as a totally separate process as a layer to measure your question in and your response out to see whether they fit your parameters of what you permit.
So my assumption around guardrails is it was sort of like, when I get web filtering services from a security company, I can check all the boxes, no hate speech, no
Mhm.
gambling, no whatever. And I don't have to go out and find all of the URLs associated with that. They're doing it for me. I assumed it was the same with guardrails. Is that the case? Or it sounds like I can also program in very specific rules.
Yeah, that's exactly true is what you said right at the end, that it both does these categories that you don't have to train it on all the words that qualify
Okay.
as profanity. You can
Okay.
check the box
That
and
would
set
be
it. I think it's from
interesting
like
day.
low, medium, high. It would be an interesting day to program that in. I would do it. I think it'd be fun. And you can also give it these sort of AI generative questions and answers that it should be providing. So it's sort of going beyond just what it supports
Okay.
to block traffic. So it sort of works like a WAF in the sense that it's finding specific things, but it's also finding similar things that qualify. So if it's detecting that it seems like profanity, it will be blocked by the profanity filter, which is pretty cool. It occasionally is a little overzealous. Some of our finance team wants to talk about like, how do I find a credit card number that I can use to check out, in our demo environment? And then it's saying, I'm not going to give you a credit card number, obviously. And so we've had some edge cases where we have to kind of tweak it for, the bizarre things that developers have to do to make apps actually work.
Yeah.
Well, you need to make exceptions for Australians in the case of profanity, because what most of us would consider profanity is just everyday speech for the average Australian.
Absolutely. Maybe there's an Australian mode. I haven't seen it yet, but AWS, please build that.
Conversation context, Kyla. That's really important for that human-like experience when chatting with the bot. So how do we get context?
Well, that's an interesting problem here because you're building a conversation, which is a series of person A or a user speaking to person B or the system. And you can have lots of conversation turns, but that's what you're providing to Bedrock and saying, here's the whole conversation that's previously happened. Please generate a response using this context. And at first, I built this to just read everything in a direct message thread, like all of the conversation you've had, which can be hundreds of turns on all sorts of topics. And the AI went crazy because it got really confused. First of all, there's just too much context for it to process
Mhm.
in a reasonable amount of time. But also, if you're asking about topic A and then topic B and then topic C, those are kind of related, but passing all that information at once to someone, you would confuse any human with so much context immediately, and it confused the AI right away. So I decided to kind of bound a conversation's context in the same way that sort of Slack does natively, which is called threads. Um, Threads are sort of these child objects in a direct message. And so it's not a parent level message. It's a child beneath a message. And so I just read the entire context of the thread. And we also look up all of the user information. So find your real name, Drew Conroy Murray, and your pronouns if you set them in Slack, so it can speak more naturally. It was using they, them for everyone, which was bizarre. And
Hmm.
it's able to, because it's reading that whole thread and passing it forward to Bedrock, it's able to understand who's speaking. So if Ethan and Drew are arguing about something, it's able to understand who has opinions about what. And it can kind of help settle arguments or summarize the positions of the different people on the thread and who agrees with who and who thinks blah, blah, blah. But that's something I didn't expect people to do. They immediately started using it to summarize these really long Slack threads of these two experts arguing for 50 conversations. And then you come in at the bottom and you're like, it's that meme where you walk into the room with pizza and everything's on fire and you're like, what happened here? And so you can ask the AI, like, please read this whole thread and summarize in 50 words or less what they're talking about. And it can do that because it's reading the thread and getting all the context of who's speaking and what they've said, including any documents that are attached. Documents is a whole other challenging ball of wax, but primarily that's how context is working. That's all something that I just kind of made up, that it makes sense to me in Slack threads being a conversation boundary. So let's just use that as a conversation for Bedrock.
And so, but that's me using the Slack bot. I'm interfacing with Slack. I need to know
Mhm.
each conversation I have with this Slack bot needs to be threaded in order to have context. Is that true?
Yeah, so you'll either tag it in a thread or in a parent message, and it will respond in a thread. So it sort of guides you
Ah,
towards
okay.
using this model. You don't have to memorize that.
Got it,
And
got it.
that's the sort of context that's passed in real time. And it's all built so it doesn't keep it. But we also have training data, the knowledge base that it can look up. And so we use this first phase of the conversation where you read the entire thread, which can be really long, right? People get verbose in Slack, or at least
Mm.
I'm very chatty in Slack. And it'll look at our knowledge base, which is all the data we have trained it on. It's a vector database called OpenSearch in AWS, is like a vector database platform. And that's where all of our knowledge is stored. And it sort of finds related conversational vectors. So like related to the topics you're talking on, the information you've trained it on. And we pass that information as additional context. And I'm just doing additional conversation turns that say like, hey, this is a knowledge base entry. Please use this. And then phase two is you actually talk to the model with that assembled thread of the user's request, the thread that it's in, the conversation knowledge base information that we've retrieved. And that whole package is given to the AI to say like, hey, please make sense of this and give us a response.
Hmm. Uh, a quick observation here. In your notes, you mentioned you were running Bedrock in US East 1, AWS US East 1, but it was kind of broke and you ended up using US West 2 and it's been working great ever since. What was your experience with it being broke? Were you just getting errors or strange responses or?
It was just giving me errors that my things were malformed. My API requests were malformed, despite them exactly matching the doc. And you try to troubleshoot your code, like maybe I've done it wrong. I've done it wrong many times before, but this exactly matches the document example. And I talked to our TAM and some friends, and they said, well, East One breaks sometimes with Bedrock. East One is an overloaded region. There's a lot going on there.
Mhm.
But West 2 it gets the new stuff first because I don't know why. So try that. And I flipped over to that region and it worked right away with no code changes. I just pointed out a new place. So since then I've left it. So my Lambda runs in East 1 and it uses service in West 2. That's called cross-region inference, but it works fine and it's free. So I just kind of left it there. It's a little awkward jumping around the console regions to read the logs for different services, but it's not annoying enough for me to fix it. So that's where it stays.
Now, speaking of free, you mentioned earlier that overall this project's been pretty inexpensive, but I am scared to death of running up my AWS costs. Is there a way I can guard against costs getting out of control if I'm using Bedrock or Lambda?
Yeah, absolutely. You can write warnings in your Cost Explorer that trigger and will email you if you're beyond like $10 a month or $20 a month, or if your projection is higher than that.
Mm.
But generally in Bedrock, it's so inexpensive. I would recommend you could try it. And Lambda similarly costs almost nothing. I think Lambda costs like $1 a month for 400 requests, and Bedrock costs about $10 a month for 400 requests. The real cost is the knowledge bases. You have to be very careful with that. I trained it on about 40 gigabytes of Confluence data. And you would expect storing 40 gigabytes in a database would cost, maybe $100 a month. I don't know, that odd napkin math. It's around $1,200 a month. So it's like $25,000 a year or something like that is what it initially cost. I've been fiddling with it to get the math down, and we're still around like 14 grand a year to store 40
Wow.
gigabytes of data in a vector
Wow.
database. So that is significant for,
Mm.
especially for an internal tool that's not generating revenue. I'm just a
Yeah.
cost center building stuff. And so be very wary of knowledge bases because they're very expensive. But the Lambda and the Bedrock so far have cost almost nothing. A couple of
Mm.
Starbucks a month, and you're good to go for an AI bot.
Mhm. In your series, as you've been writing about this, you made a big deal about Lambda being all about you don't want to have to think about infrastructure ever, and so Lambda. But let's say I'm okay with managing some infrastructure. I've got a server lying around. Of your architecture, what you've designed here, what processes would be running on a server? And would running on a server simplify this thing, or am I just kind of moving complexity around?
I think you're moving complexity around a little bit for a couple of reasons. So first of all, it has to be exposed to the internet somehow because the Slack servers are on the internet. So either you need something like an ngrok that's doing this sort of piping of public to private to get to your server, or you need an ALB to receive the traffic. which is going to cost you more than Bedrock is costing per month, even with no use. I think it's $16 a month, even if you have no services at all.
Hmm.
And you also need to handle the authentication because you're using IAM authentication. I was going to say it expired after a few months, but with an implicit IAM role, I think that would actually be solved. So you would just have to handle ingress and it would work just fine.
Hmm.
I think that's all. Yeah. That there's a main function in the code. I think in the show notes, we'll link you to the GitHub if you want to check it out. There's a Lambda handler and there's a main function handler, and they're written in such a way you can just run the code and it'll detect your sort of context. And if you're just running on your computer and you have all the things installed, it'll work fine.
So as opposed to the webhook reaching out to that Lambda URL and firing
Mhm.
up it's just gonna the webhook would instead hit my server instance and it would run from there, where it'd just be sitting there live waiting.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's an either or. You've built something that's standalone, no infrastructure required, don't have to upgrade, don't have to maintain, and it's pretty
Yep,
cheap.
very
But
lazy.
I looked at it not being someone who spends much time in cloud or writing Terraform, or have never written a Lambda function in my life, going, this all seems a little intimidating. But like a service running on a server, that I know, that I'm really comfortable with. But as you say, it is just moving things around. Now I've got a process living on a server, and now I got to care for it and feed it. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. It
trade-offs.
becomes a pet. This is the Lambda version is a cattle. If it goes crazy and throws an error, we kill it and we get a new one. And that's an unfortunate metaphor. But if it's on a server, it has to be your pet. You're monitoring the CPU. You make sure the disk doesn't fill up. Have you patched it recently? You probably should. Do we have any kind of SRE infrastructure in place to monitor it's the CPU getting high and it's slowing down because it's handling too much? Do we have antivirus on it? You just sort of have to handle all of that stuff in this sort of pet world where you have your server and you have to care and feed it.
And then final follow-up question for that. You talked about ngrok, and it sounds like it's a gateway to go between a public network and a private network, kind of. What if we haven't
Yeah.
heard of ngrok before? What is this thing? What does it do?
Totally. I hadn't before I built this project, but I had this public webhook coming from Slack because you're messaging it, and that's what happens when you tag your bot. It generates a webhook and it sends it somewhere. And I had to get it to my computer, which is, inside my internal network. I didn't want to give myself a public IP or anything. And I just have a silly router, not a Cisco ASA or something, to do like a static NAT in towards my computer. Not that I really want to. I like my NAT shield from the internet.
Mm.
So I needed to get that to my computer. And this ngrok service, it's an open source tool and platform that lets you do one URL forwarding concurrently to your private computer. And it sort of builds a tunnel from the ngrok service to your computer from public to private. And it gives you some insight into each HTTP connection of like the code that you're receiving and returning. So like a 200 is a happy little HTTP packet, and you can see the latency and how much traffic you're getting and stuff like that. And it's just this cool little open source tool and platform that made developing locally from like a public generated webhook super easy. I doubt it's as secure enough for an enterprise implementation. I wouldn't build your whole bot like that, but you probably could. Maybe you could run ngrok to get your public access to your local development environment. Try it out.
And the key piece of it, it sounds like you said there's an ngrok service. So there's some ngrok service living out in the cloud that's going to be basically a proxy. I'm going to send my
Hmm.
webhook. It's going to land on the ngrok service, which is going to go, oh, I know where this goes. It's on the other side of this tunnel to Kyler's computer sitting inside of her enterprise, and
Yep.
sends it through. It feels like a proxy. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yep. And you don't have to maintain the ngrok stuff. It's maintained by this ngrok organization. And you just have your Lambda, your Python listening on localhost port 3000 or something like that. And
Yeah.
you just tell the ngrok, like, accept traffic on 443 securely, and then tunnel it securely to me and drop it on port 3000 localhost. And so your
Hmm.
your Python script receives the traffic. It's wild because it's so complex, but I probably spent 15 minutes Googling it, and then I turned it on and it worked right away. And I've never had an issue with it.
Oh.
Hmm.
And this is an open source project?
Yep. So for testing, it's been incredible for really rapid development.
So we talked earlier about, the model you chose, and it was from Anthropic, a Claude version. But you also, so that Claude version is trained on some essentially public data set, but you wanted to augment it with internal data, which you said yours coming from Confluence.
Mhm.
Is that what RAG means, retrieval augmented generation? Is that what this was, or something else?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So for folks that, aren't AI engineers, RAG is retrieve and generate, or retrieval augmented generation, which means use an AI to construct vectors. So you take this unstructured data, which that's the slur that AI engineers use for stuff that's written for humans. Like you have a document, you have a chart, you have your Excel spreadsheet that's written for you to understand it. It's not written for an AI model to understand it, and sort of convert that data to a format that's understandable by a vector database, by a model. But there are models that are specifically an embedding model. That's what it's called. They're specifically built to take unstructured data and
Mhm.
store it in vector databases in a format that's compatible with models. And so it read all of our Confluence. It also supports S3 on the AWS side, and you can upload whatever. Cool side benefit of that is when you upload stuff, it triggers the knowledge base to read it right away.
Mhm.
Versus the Confluence side, you have to go click the button that says read Confluence again today, which is, I hope they solve scheduling in the future, but right now you have to click a button to say read it again. And there's also others supported, like there's SharePoints. So I'm just going to keep scaling this. The way that we're starting to frame this project internally is all of this data is already accessible to all of our users. You can go to
Mhm.
Confluence yourself and read the website, or SharePoint, or Slack, or our PDFs for our customer service agents, or our PagerDuty resolutions for our SREs. And all of those services individually have AI models you can pay for. A lot of companies have risen to this, but they're all seated licenses and they're all separate. And so if you're paying for like $10 a month per user per platform, that's like, I don't even know. The math just goes crazy. So even if we're paying $14,000 a year to have this knowledge base exist, if I can put data from all of these disparate services in one place, then this model can make some pretty informed decisions. If it can read your PagerDuty and your SharePoint and your Confluence and your Slack, and
Mm.
maybe all your PDFs of like how to resolve stuff. So that's, I think, the pitch is, what could an AI model do that's very accessible for your users and private, and has read all of your internal infrastructure documents and maybe your configs too? I don't know what we can train it on, but we're going to put a lot in there and see what happens.
And just a side note, we've been talking about vector database. I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up before the show. So my understanding is that the thing that's cool about a vector database is that it can sort of capture and infer relationships without being tied to a specific keyword. So an example that I found is like, if I put in a query about smartphones, it will return information that it found related to also mobile devices and cell phones, as opposed to just keying off the specific word smartphone. That's the benefit of a vector database. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Keywords work the best. It still shows pretty solid deference for like an exact match of a keyword. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's finding related topics in much the same way your brain would. When we say phone, you think like Android, iOS, blah, blah,
Yes.
blah.
Yeah, yeah.
Long lost BlackBerry. Yeah. So
So, getting your Confluence database into the model, did you have to do anything special to prepare the data, or was it just like, here you go and you take care of it?
no, it worked really well. This is a beta data source that is supported by AWS Bedrock's team. So you create a knowledge base and then you add data sources to it. The
Hmm.
knowledge base basically is one-to-one with an OpenSearch database that's just running in the background, charging you money. And the data sources are these sort of scheduled automated processes to go scrape something and shove the data into your OpenSearch database, into your knowledge base. And so you can add lots of data sources into one knowledge base. So Confluence is supported. It's still in beta. It still doesn't read a lot of your specially structured data. So
Hmm.
Bedrock itself supports PDFs and documents and Excel and etc. But this specific ingestion mechanism for Confluence doesn't. So each time I run it, it shows 80% failure. It's like 200,000 failures of 250,000 documents, like 70 or 80%. And it still works. It's ingested all the text, but it doesn't ingest the binary files, the structured data files. So hopefully that's coming. I'm sure that'll be solved by them in the future.
Hmm.
But what we're going to do for other data, like PDFs that we upload to S3 or data we're scraping from internal wikis and putting in there is this structured data file type where you say the source is this URL, even if it's not accessible to the model, you're just storing it in S3. And so when your model references that data, you say read this thing, and it says, oh, it comes from this PDF. It doesn't say go read the PDF in the S3 human person. It says go to this URL that you have access to, this internal wiki URL that isn't read, because you can access it there as a human, but our model is not able to support that yet. So that's probably how we're going to support a lot of internal data that's private. It means duplicating data, which isn't great, but being able to put it in this model is pretty cool and powerful. So I think we're going to explore that.
So with that data ingestion that you were just describing, RAG, and augmenting the core model with all of this specific data that's specific to your organization. I'm a network engineer and I want to be able to ask the model about the state of the network in real time. Can you imagine a scenario where this, I don't know, some kind of a telemetry feed or something where the model can kind of keep up with the state of the network? And so then I can ask questions and it'll tell me what's going on in New York, these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to this question, and there's so much I don't know yet that I want to test out. But generally, these types of models are trained on general data. They're not trained on the state of the network. They're trained on how does Terraform work? What are AWS service names, etc. And you can pass it information in real time. Like, hey, we got an alert in our Slack that a VPN went down. Can you tell us what to do? But it's not reading your config. Like, it's not SSHing to your firewall and looking at state data. It's just reading the log in Slack and sort of giving you basic information about it, which is not great and not what we want. So there is this concept. You'll see it if you start reading about AI stuff called agentic,
Yeah.
agent-ic. And it's a very fancy word that just means you give the model the ability to do stuff. And so I could absolutely see a use case for saying, like, asking the model, is the VPN to Chicago up on this firewall? And giving it the ability to, in the background, SSH to your device and read your list of firewalls and look for one of the tunnels that has a description of Chicago and see its state. And that will all take some sort of custom building stuff. I haven't gotten to building agentic stuff yet, but that's supported by Bedrock, that's supported by Azure AI, I imagine supported by GCP, and that's going to be the next generation of AI stuff. It's still very, very new. It will develop significantly in the next year or two, and hopefully have some sort of pre-built puzzle pieces for us to SSH to something from an internal endpoint and read the data and sort of add it as a conversation turn so the AI can do it, can understand it. But that's for sure coming. One of the internal projects that I'm going to be building in a hack day pretty soon is to give an AI model our internal network architecture diagram. So like a PDF that shows all the system names and host subnets and stuff like that. And then hopefully a user will be able to talk to the bot and say, my IP is this. I'm going to this destination IP on this port number. Is it accessible? And what I'm hoping the AI will be able to do is understand where the user is in the network diagram and where the destination is, and then look at all the interstitial nodes in the middle and read their configuration. Because if we have put the configuration into like an S3 bucket, this isn't real time, by the way. This is like maybe having your rancid open source config backup tool, dump it into S3 and then read the S3. Is it currently permitted? Because how much time as a network engineer do you spend with people saying, my host can't get to the thing. Should I be able to get to is it the network that's doing this? So if you can have a bot that answers all those questions, imagine how much time you can get back. So I have no idea if that will work. I hope that it will work. Ask me in a couple weeks after we have this hack day, and I will let you know whether we succeeded.
I suspect it's a challenging problem in that there's companies out there that have products that do this that have taken them years to develop so that it's robust enough for an enterprise use case. Forward Networks comes to mind, Selector AI comes to mind as folks in this space doing this kind of stuff. But I'm intrigued. I really want to know where this goes. Another question is related to cost. We were talking about cost before, and you said, "Hey, the big cost comes in when you deal with that knowledge base." Is
Hmm.
that what we were just talking about with what you do with Confluence, or anytime you're ingesting
Hmm.
RAG style data? Is that where that
Yep.
cost is going to come in?
Yeah, even it's funny because even if you're just reading like a PDF, it still has to spin up the whole infrastructure of a knowledge base that's actually an open search database in the background. And its minimum cost is that like around $17,000 a year. And that's huge, even if you're reading one PDF and training it on one PDF. So that's just not great. I'm hoping that as these technologies mature, we'll get to points where we can have it be much cheaper and be charged based on like the number of tokens ingested or something that's more corollary to the amount of data. Because one PDF training shouldn't cost 18 grand a year. Like that's just unreasonable. And I think our AWS team is understanding of that. We've been able to make one change to bring the cost down about 35%, which is helpful. But I want it to be a couple $100 a year or something more correspondent to
Yeah.
the value that it's generating for the business. And we're just not there yet. We have to really commit as an enterprise. And if you're like a mom and pop shop, you can't spend 18 grand a year on this widget. Like it's just not reasonable. So hopefully we'll get there soon.
Well, Carla Middleton, thank you for sharing all of your experience and knowledge with us. This was absolutely fantastic. And if you're
Yeah.
listening and you want to get into the details, you want to see everything, all the code, all the Terraform, etc., that Kyla's been working with, that's all at letsdodevops.com, which is her Substack. And Kyla, where else can people find you on the internet?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. I host that Day 2 DevOps with Ned Bellavance on the same Packet Pushers network that you're on now. So please come check us out. And I just get around to as many conferences as will have me. I'm hopefully going to be in Philadelphia later this year at Reinforce. So look for me there. And if you do want to read more about this AI stuff on letsdodevops.com, I have a coupon code to read the stuff that's still behind the paywall. It's all becoming free, but letsdodevops.com/heavy networking with no space or dash or anything will get you a free month trial to go read it all, copy it to your desktop, get that stuff down. And all the code is free on GitHub. It's all linked from the Substack. So you can do this in your own enterprise today.
That's very generous of you. Let's do DevOps.com/heavy networking. I didn't know you were going to do that until just this second. That's awesome, Kyla. Thank you for that. Seriously. Again, Kyla gave me a couple of freebies so I could read and research for this podcast without having to sub to the her Substack. But I will tell you, subscribe to the Substack. It's that good. It's really, really valuable information if you're at all interested in this stuff. Anyway, thank you for listening to Heavy Networking today from the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. It's all content for your professional career development. And just some quick housekeeping items as we close. Merch, go to store.packetpushers.net and don't overlook the collections link in the header of store.packetpushers.net. We got stuff for every show that's in the Packet Pushers family. Go buy yourself something nice and signal to others your refined podcast palette. We have a newsletter. We have multiple newsletters, but I'm going to focus on the human infrastructure newsletter today. Drew and I publish that every week. We share the best blogs, news, vendor announcements, resource, and of course, memes that we have found. Everything you need to know from the world of networking and tech sent to your inbox with love. AutoCon 3 is our last housekeeping note today. AutoCon is the industry's only conference devoted to network automation, and it is coming to Prague in late May 2025. The Packet Pushers team is going to be there, and we would love to see you. Visit networkautomation.forum and get a ticket for AutoCon 3 while you still can. This event does have an attendance cap, and it will sell out. It's gonna. It's just a matter of time before it's sold out. So if you're interested in going to Prague for AutoCon 3, go buy your ticket, networkautomation.forum. And if you enjoyed our conversation with Kyla, you again should subscribe to her podcast, Day 2 DevOps, along with Ned Bellavance, and her Let's Do DevOps Substack. That would be pretty swell of you. If you have comments or questions about this show, send them to us via packetpushers.net/follow-up. And until next week, just remember, too much networking would never be enough.